There is a question from Mr. Samrat Bandopadhyay. Sir, could you please explain whether the existing protocol, such as the Cartagena Protocol and Nagoya Protocol, are enough, along with the extent laws of the countries, to protect and conserve microorganisms and patents? And there is another second part to the question. Sir, what is your opinion on the Budapest Treaty? Is it equitable for intergeneration, for testing lab infrastructure for Asian countries? And does it work for microorganisms always from patentability and its future commercial importance?
I think these are some of the issues that have come up because the biological material is so complex that you cannot describe it fully in the patent application. And therefore, because patent application requires that, patent laws requires that you should have described your invention in a manner so that the person skilled in the art will be able to practice that invention. And if it involves biological material, it becomes difficult if the biological material is not available to people. And the way out is that you deposit those biological material that you cannot describe in the patent application in sufficient detail so that it is available for people to use it to replicate the invention when the patent protection gets over.
Yes,
Yes, I think this is an increasingly debatable topic actually because of the biodiversity issues that have come up. Yes, more of it is related to the fact that people have been exploiting the biological resources of countries and then without giving proper benefit to the local communities from where those biological materials have been obtained from. Well, I am not sure if the requirements and if the protocol is sufficiently enough. We are still struggling to find a better way to address those issues because these are complex areas, and hopefully we will be able to find a balance between patent protection and conservation of genetic resources and benefit sharing to the people. Yes, it requires a balancing act because there are issues. Let's say, for example, if you have isolated a microorganism, because how do you really pinpoint that a particular organism or biotic resource has been isolated from a particular region? Unless those organism carry some very specific geographical markers, it will be very difficult. Let's say, for example, you are infected with an organism and it causes disease, but you have visited some country and you got the infection there, and you went to some other country and where you fell sick and it was isolated there. And how do you identify that this particular organism belong to that country? If it is endemic to XYZ country, you can easily pinpoint that, okay, that's the genetic resource, and the country should have rights in those biological material. But if you are not able to pinpoint the geographical origin of those kind of organisms, and if it is isolated in some other countries, it's quite challenging to ascertain the geographical resource and identify the real beneficiaries. So I think we are still struggling to find a right balance on these aspects. So as things evolve, we will have more better clarity.
There is another question from Mr. Satyan. Sir, in microbiology and microorganism patents, do these microorganisms have to be invented only, or whether they should not be existing in nature, or maybe of being newly discovered, are also amenable for obtaining patents? because his opinion is that everything seeming natural, seeming to be discoveries or development of knowledge from earlier professors' discovery already, whether they are patentable and what is the differentiation. For example, Sir C.V. Raman, for having discovered that plants and fungi have life, uh, did not obtain any patent for it, or did not, or whether it is patentable or not.
Yeah, so the practice of obtaining the patent on the organisms or any biological material that you have isolated from the natural surroundings, you may call it as a discovery, because discovery is nothing but finding out what is existing in nature. And the practice is different across different countries, as I have said. As far as India is concerned, there is an absolute bar. If you have just isolated any biological material from the natural surrounding, it will be considered as a discovery. It will not be patent. You cannot obtain patent protection for them because that would be considered as product of nature. In US, after the media decision that we discussed, it is increasingly getting difficult to obtain patent protection for materials that you have just isolated from the surroundings or from the environment. But still, in US, if you are able to show or characterize that it is quite different from what is existing in nature, then probably you might have some chance. But European practice is completely different, because European patent office will not deny you patent protection merely on the fact that you have isolated from the natural environment. So long as you can show that there is some industrial application of your invention, you can obtain patent protection as far as European Patent Office is concerned. Let's say, for example, you have uh, discovered a bacterium, and say that bacterium is uh, producing some kind of an antibiotic, and this is done for the first time. In other countries, in India, perhaps in US, natural isolates, you may not be able to get it. But European Patent Office will look at it from the point of view is that whether there is some kind of a technical effect or utility involved there. So if you have isolated that bacterium from the natural environment, and if you are able to show that there is a utility, the antibiotic can be used in a beneficial manner, you can obtain patent on that. So European Patent Office will not deny you patent just for the fact that you have only isolated that microorganism, so long as you show that you have isolated it through a technical process, and there is a technical effect of that invention.
Another question, sir, from Mr. Satyan. Can development of mixture of materials to produce products like Zinda Tilismat or Jandu Balm be patented for such products after clinical trials only, or even before conducting such clinical trials sometimes for use and produce from natural ingredients, whether a patent is possible?
Yeah, so there are two things here. Clinical trials may happen at a later date, but in the patent application, you need to show that if you are using a mixture of multiple substances, you need to show that there is some kind of a synergistic effect between these two substances. And if you can show that in the patent specification, it need not necessarily be the data coming from the human clinical trial, but if you can show with some kind of a lab experiments or with some kind of preclinical data with the experiments that you have done in the animals, then you can obtain patent protection for those kind of invention. But the key is that you have to show that the effect is synergistic. Let's say, for example, if you just combine paracetamol and ibuprofen and make a admixture of it, you will not be able to get a patent on that, because paracetamol will act in its own manner and ibuprofen will act in its own manner. So there is no synergy between them. But let's say if you make a soap with different ingredients, or a liquid soap, a liquid hand wash that has various ingredients, and those ingredients will help. They are not acting independently, but they help in effectively cleaning of your hand and generating lather, and individually those each components are not capable of doing. You can obtain patent protection for those kind of invention. The typical example, as I mentioned during my slide, during my presentation, was the formulation. You get objections from the patent office often that, so you have a protein, and to stabilize that protein, you need the various stabilizers and buffers like sugars or amino acids or some other stuff. And you can always show with experimental data saying that the protein as such, if you give it to the patients, you cannot have the desired effect. And if you store that molecule on the shelf, the protein may degrade. But when you have this kind of excipients in the form of stabilizers, then it will protect the protein from degradation. So there is a synergistic effect between these components. So if you are able to show those synergistic effect, you can obtain patent, and the data can come from the experiments in the lab. It can be the data from the animal models. And if the nature of invention is such that you need to have data from the human clinical trial, then of course you may need to have that. But generally for this kind of technologies or this kind of patentable subjects, in my experience, I have relied on the data that is generated in the lab, or the data that is obtained from the animal models. That was sufficient to obtain patent protection in my practice.
There is another question from Mr. Syed. Whether patent obtained from isolated protein abroad have any enforceability in India?
No, patent rights are territorial in nature. So a patent that is obtained in X country cannot be enforced in Y country. So if a US patent is there, it is enforceable within the US territory, and Indian patent can be enforced within the Indian patent territory. So the Indian territory. So there is nothing called as global patent. So if somebody says that there is an international patent or global patent, it's a myth. There is an international patent application that can be filed through the PCT route, but it is not a patent. But you can have a European patent that covers the entire European countries which are signatory to the European Patent Convention. And for enforcement, you have to go to individual countries. But the latest development is that there is a unified patent code in Europe, so you can enforce it along all the countries. So the framework is just getting in place in the Europe. We may soon have the unitary patent system in Europe for the enforceability part pretty soon. You can obtain a patent that is applicable for the European countries through the European Patent Office, who are party to the European Patent Convention. But definitely patents are territorial in nature. That's the fundamental premise.
It's again from Mr. Samrat Bandyopadhyay. Sir, from licensing perspective, what is your opinion for successful commercialization of patent? That is, does exclusive licensing via voluntary method have greater advantage vis-a-vis non-exclusive compulsory licensing? What are the comparative advantages from patenting of microorganism or plants, at least in US and UK?
I think in US and UK, the compulsory licensing type of regime that we have in India, you don't have that. But definitely the countries have march in rights, okay, because the sovereign countries are there, so they can always use the inventions for the benefit of those of their nations, if there are any inventions, and if the needs are urgent. So it's not like that you can always go about imposing your sovereign rights to use those inventions. That's not possible, at least in US and Europe, and not even in India, unless there are some specific conditions, there are emergency situations like pandemics, etc., where you can use it. That's one aspect. The other thing is that if the government has funded the research programs, and if any inventions have been developed as a result of those fundings, then government will have a share in that. So government will have, because usually the agreements that I had the opportunity to work on with some of the US universities, which were funded by the federal grants. So there would always be clauses in those agreements, so where the government will have rights in those invention under certain specific situations. So they can always march in and exercise those rights, not in the normal situations. So whether exclusive license, again, the university or whoever the patentee is there, they can even give voluntarily exclusive as well as non-exclusive licenses. Okay, absolutely no bar. Compulsory licenses are statutory licenses which are granted by the patent office through the force of law. But the normal licenses that happens are always at the discretion of the patentee to either give an exclusive or non-exclusive license. That depends upon the negotiations that happen between the two parties and what are the terms and conditions. In fact, I have worked on both exclusive and non-exclusive licenses with some of the US institutions, where we obtain for some technologies, we obtain an exclusive license. The thing is that you have to pay up huge amounts, and probably take on prosecution costs and so many other things, and quite a good amount of royalties you may have to be paying. But if it is a non-exclusive license, because the patentee is free to license it to some other partners, so the costs associated with such licenses are not heavy. But again, you have to take a call whether what is the market you are targeting, whether an exclusive license is more beneficial to you, or a non-exclusive is something that you will be content with. So those are business decisions. The patent attorneys and the management of the company and the business people have to come on board and discuss and develop a strategy. So the compulsory licenses are always statutory licenses through the authority, and they operate under certain specific conditions. Which is good, which is right, and which is wrong? It's a difficult question. It depends upon the situation where you are in.
There is one question from Mr. Paneer Selvam. Sir, how far enforcement mechanism for protection of microorganisms, like in microorganisms, how far enforcement mechanism in microorganisms through PCT in India is fulfilled, or whether existing provisions are sufficient?
Well, PCT is not related to any kind of enforcement mechanism. PCT is just a route for you to file your patent application. It makes the job easier for you, because you have to file within 12 months from your priority application, a non-priority application to be filed in all the countries where you want the patent protection. And the easier way to file is through the PCT route, because more than 150 countries are party to the PCT. And if you file a single application with international bureau, then it is presumed to be filed in all those countries that you have designated in your PCT application. So it is just a process by which you file your application in multiple countries by filing a single application. And after some time, at around 31 period time, you will have to, some countries have some other period, you will have to enter national phase in each of the respective countries where you want to seek the patent protection. And those individual countries will examine the patent application, and once it satisfies the grounds of patentability as per the laws prevailing in those countries, you will get a patent in those countries. And once you have patent in those countries, it's then you can talk about the enforcement of your patent, not through the PCT route. It is just a mechanism to file your patent application, because at a 12-month deadline, if you have to file your application in, let's say, 100 countries, it's a huge task. So, but by filing a single PCT application, it is by designating all those 100 countries, it is presumed to be filed in all the countries, and you will not lose the risk of losing the priority, and you can enter the national phase at the respective deadlines in the countries. It gives you more breathing space compared to the traditional route of filing within 12 months under Paris Convention in so many countries if you have to do. So no link between enforceability of patent and PCT filing.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Sir, thank you so much for patiently clarifying the questions of the participants. Now I request DPIIT Chair Professor at Osmania University, Professor G.B. Reddy, sir, to please continue with the proceedings.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, Dr. Irfan Abbas. And I thank Mr. Bukhari for sharing his tremendous knowledge in the field of biotechnology and life patents. In fact, participants have been posting the messages of thanks, in fact, thanking the resource person for clarifying so many doubts they have been entertaining. And apart from the life patents, the patents in the life sciences, the resource person has also clarified number of other issues relating to even PCT applications and getting patents from PCT countries. And I must thank personally Mr. Bukhari for being the resource person today and for enlightening our participants.